Sound design is often the unsung hero of great filmmaking. It is not as flashy as cinematography or writing or visual effects, but it is very often the difference between an engaging film that feels full and a film that falls flat and feels empty. Director Steven Spielberg is quoted as saying, "The eye sees better when the sound is great."
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
And according to Barsam and Monahan in their book Looking at Movies, sound helps the filmmaker tell a movie's story by reproducing and intensifying the world that has been partially created by the film's visual elements. Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey is a shining example of this. You can laugh now. There are many fascinating choices that Kubrick makes with the sound design in this film. One such choice is the use of multiple musical motifs, but he also chooses, unlike many modern space films, to make space silent. According to film critic Mark Schoberg, the silence in the film could represent God, or more particularly, the idea of divine indifference. But others would say that the silence is only in the film due to Kubrick's obsession with realism. Regardless of the reasoning, the choice to use silence has a profound effect on how the audience reacts to space. By choosing to use silence, Kubrick projects this feeling of isolation and powerlessness upon space. When Frank is in space, it doesn't feel epic, it feels terrifying. It is made clear that Frank is utterly alone. The Blue Danube Waltz is one of a few classical music pieces that Kubrick uses to create the score of the film. Kubrick uses these pieces as musical motifs to connect moments in the story. For example, when the apes encounter the monolith on Earth, and when modern humans encounter the monolith on the moon, Ligeti's Requiem plays. Its atmospheric and atonal qualities immediately pierce the audience's ears, creating an uncomfortable and unfathomable feeling to the monoliths. During the most intense scenes of the movie, like when Dave is locked out of the spaceship by Hal and when Dave kills Hal, no music is heard. Instead, Kubrick relies entirely on silence to give these scenes the darkness they deserve.
I can feel it. I'm afraid.
If there were to be music placed over the scene, it would ruin the isolation that the scene projects as Hal is begging for his life. The lack of music gives these scenes a realistic edge and a seriousness that contrasts with the fanfare of the epic orchestral pieces like Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Kubrick's masterful sound design is not just consistent in this film. but in his other films as well. For example, just like using the music of Ligeti in this film, he also uses it in his film The Shining. As stated in an interview with Michael Cement,
I wouldn't abandon it if I was using contemporary music, but I just don't see how, if you're using orchestral music, why should you go to a composer? There's no point in having somebody try to write something like Mozart.
this choice to use classical music rather than a traditional film score gives Kubrick's movies an over-the-top sense of grandeur and an underlying frenzied nature. There is much to be learned from Stanley Kubrick's sound design techniques, from using silence to create terror to using classical music to create motifs, but perhaps the most important lesson to draw from Stanley Kubrick's sound design is that sound is just as important as picture. Kubrick's background was in photography, and his movies are visually stunning, but it is the sound design that truly creates the soul of his films. I'm just kidding. The takeaway is that you can do whatever you want with sound design. There are no rules. You can use silence, or you can use over-the-top classical music, and everyone will still argue about your films being boring because the pacing sucks, and because nothing matters. It all comes down to taste. So, if you're gonna make a movie, you might as well make one that you enjoy.